All right, here we go with your rhetorical strength lesson number 3. Today we'll be talking about refining your rhetoric using short, simple sentences and sentence fragments. And as with all of the others, this comes out of our textbook, pages 506 to 512, so you can always find more information there if you decide that this isn't enough. So we'll start by talking about simple sentences, and hopefully we all know that a sentence is made up of two basic elements. Like in order to be a sentence, it must have a subject and a verb. In other words, a sentence is one independent clause. However, we know that most sentences have more than just a subject and a verb, that they're made up of independent clauses and dependent clauses and phrases, noun phrases, verb phrases, all the different types of parts of speech. So we want to break down sentences to their bare minimum here and just talk about what happens if we just use the simplest forms of sentences. And when we do that, we can see that those really short sentences can actually be quite useful. So we can use them for rhetorical reasons, and those reasons, I see there being 4 of those reasons. The first of those reasons is to break up several long sentences. That sometimes we get in the habit of writing really long and complex ideas, and we just need to give the reader a break from that for just a second to kind of hit the reset button. The second reason that I see simple sentences as being rhetorically useful is for summarizing complex ideas or multiple points. And this is similar to the first reason, in that sometimes you have these really long sentences because you have these really complicated ideas that you want to convey to the audience, and you do that, but then you just want to summarize them, right? Like you just want to hit that nail one more time to kind of say, bang, there it is. And so simple sentences can help you do that. The third reason that we might use a simple sentence is in order to transition between sentences or paragraphs. Sometimes we just want that one little idea that will get us from where we were to where we are going, like kind of as a turn signal. And we can have longer transition sentences, but sometimes a simple one, a short one will work. And then finally, a simple sentence can help us to make or reiterate a point. That sometimes we've said so much leading up to this certain point, but the point can actually be made with just a few words. We needed all that other stuff to kind of give the background, but now we can make the point simply and in a straightforward way. So let's look at an example. The example that I'm going to show you has 2 fairly lengthy, wordy paragraphs, and then I will have highlighted the simple sentences in red, and we'll kind of I'll talk you through how they're working. So here we go. Logically, people may assume that the symbolic choice to define oneself through an animal avatar indicates a certain affinity for that animal and its embodied qualities. For example, those unfamiliar with Batman may assume that he chose his animalistic alter ego because he admires their stealth, their nocturnal nature, and their ingenuity. Batman fears bats, though. This complicates his choice to use the creatures when expressing the deepest aspects of his soul. His intimate affiliation with the thing that frightens him ties the success of his crime-fighting mission to an unstated need to conquer his fears, creating an inordinate amount of pressure for success. Failure looms large. At any point, Batman's intent could be overwhelmed by his fear of the creature he personifies. Consequently, enemies such as the Scarecrow learn to take advantage of these fears. In Batman Begins, the Scarecrow disables the Dark Hero by overwhelming him with that fear, thereby moving his plan of citywide domination by fear forward. That has to be the Scarecrow's intent, anyway. However, Batman's ability to route that intent by overcoming his anxiety ultimately enables the audience to see that overcoming one's fear is the ultimate weapon against malintent and villainy, not only in those around us, but in ourselves. So we can see in these two paragraphs that we've got the longer sentences, the ones in black, are wordy and dense with ideas. And probably to really make sense of them, you need to read them a couple times, you need to read them slowly, and you need to annotate like, okay, this is what he's saying. But with the inclusion of these short, simple sentences, it helps us to kind of consolidate our thoughts. So the first one, Batman fears bats, though, it's not only is it breaking up the two long sentences that came before it and the ones that come after it, but it's also it's being used as a transition to get us to the next point. This is what we may assume, but this is actually what's true. So it's serving that function. The second one, failure looms large, is one that's reiterating a point. That in the previous sentence, it's talking about how Batman's fear of bats is could be a problem, could become a problem for him, and creates pressure. But what it really comes down to is that there's always failure looming over him. So the three words "failure looms large" really help to drive that point home. It's like what I said with the nail being, hitting the nail one more time. This is the point that I'm trying to make. If you didn't pick it up from the previous sentence, that's, here it is for you, plain and simple. And the final sentence in red, that has to be the Scarecrow's intent anyway, is again summarizing the complex idea of the previous sentence, and reiterating that point so that we can go forward and make the final point about what we're learning from all of this information. So you can see, hopefully, how these simple sentences are working in conjunction with the longer ones to kind of help the longer ones out, where the longer ones without these simple sentences would be just really, really dense, and hard to follow on a first read through. Those simple sentences kind of highlight the things that we really need to be focusing on, especially. The other thing that I want to talk about briefly are sentence fragments. So on the previous slide, we talked about complete sentences. No matter what, those sentences were complete. But sometimes we use fragments as well, and the way that we're going to define fragments are they're either a phrase or a dependent clause. There's something that requires more. They don't have the full subject-verb correlation going on. And there are two ways that we use sentence fragments. They either can be used mistakenly or carelessly, or purposefully and effectively. And what I see mostly in class is that people use fragments because they don't realize they're using fragments. And what we want to get rid of is the tendency to use fragments as a mistake or carelessly. And when we do use fragments, to use them with purpose for an intended effect. So here are ways that we can use fragments. First of all, we can, similarly to simple sentences, we can use fragments as transitional phrases between ideas or facts. So if we look at this example, Mr. Freeze refuses to show emotion. The reason? He's a cold-hearted killer. In this case, the reason is a fragment. It's not, it doesn't have a subject and a verb. It's just a subject, right? But by asking this, by putting a question mark after the subject, it gives us that we're being presented essentially with a rhetorical question in fragment form, that pushes us, that transitions us from the fact that he shows emotion to why he may not show that emotion, right? So it's an effective way to get us to that point. Another way that we can use fragments is to signal that we're coming to some kind of conclusion. So in this example, Batman assessed the group of thugs on the corner. No problem, right? Like we can tell, you know, if the description were to keep going, we know what's going to be the result, right? Batman is looking and he's at these bad guys, and that he's going to be able to get rid of them without any problem. And essentially, it's allowing us to get into Batman's head a little bit by just kind of inserting that little fragment there. We also know where the story is going to go from there, how it's going to end up. A third way that we can use fragments is to really economize expression, to use the fewest words possible to say the most things possible. And this is actually a form of parallelism, which we've talked about before. So I'll show you that in this example. When we say, when preparing to go out for the night, Batman must deepen his voice, stock his utility belt, top off the gas tank. You know, by making this it's just a bulleted list of sentence fragments, right? But they all are a way of completing the sentence that comes before it. And so by using this kind of parallel structure of sentence fragments, we're able to really get across a lot of information in a shorter amount of time than if we were to write the whole sentence out. And it also kind of tells us a bit about, how much goes into, everything that Batman does every night. Finally, we can use sentence fragments to emphasize an important point, similarly to what we were talking about on the previous one. So if we take this example, as Alfred scolded Bruce Wayne for being detached from reality, Bruce stared at the clouds and imagined the faces of his enemies. Reality? So in this case, it's just a single word, right? The subject is all we've got there. But the point that it makes is that these two characters really don't share a concept of what reality is. By just inserting that one word with that question mark at the end, we get into Bruce Wayne's head and we understand that despite the fact that these two are, partners, I guess, that they're lifelong friends, Bruce Wayne has a completely different understanding of what reality is than Alfred does. And we understand the disconnect between them just by inserting that single word. And it really emphasizes that point that, on some level they can never come together. And so you should think to yourself as you're writing, how can I use shorter, simple sentences, or even just fragments of sentences in some cases, to make the points that I want to make and to take my reader, my audience, on the journey that I want to take them on. Because sometimes these things can really help us understand what we're talking about, help your audience understand what you're talking about in a much more effective and economic way.